Hello, it's Dr. Rob Lamberts, and I'm here at the Attention Deficit Factor Fiction Conference in Washington, D.C. With the Better Health Network. I'm here with Katherine Schantz. Is that right? Katherine Schantz?
Schantz.
Schantz, okay, got to get it right.
That's all right.
With Katherine Schantz, who's actually the head of the Lab School of Washington and Baltimore. Now, what the heck is the Lab School in Washington and Baltimore?
The Lab School is a school that's been in existence over 40 years and was founded by Sally Smith to really help students with specific learning disabilities who were having trouble learning in a regular classroom. And so it's designed particularly for kids who don't learn as readily as maybe some other students. So
normally,
they might.
Yeah.
Normally, and so it might be someone that you would call someone with dyslexia, or someone with ADHD would be at the school, and so they would be trying to catch up from earlier years when it was difficult to just learn to read as quickly as someone else, or learn to write a research paper that didn't ramble on in 30 directions.
Now, do you have specific criteria? Because there's kids all over with attention deficit. How do you determine that a child merits being able to go to your school?
Well, we're really looking for someone who's displaying difficulty with learning. And I know ADHD has really been something that people have looked at their behavior, their emotions, their impairment in daily living. But one of the other things that happens is that it complicates learning to read. It co-occurs with students with dyslexia quite often. And it affects the writing process. It affects the completion process. And as they become high school students, the executive functioning, which is such a part of ADD, is so important. If you think of how many transitions a kid makes every day, how many different papers they have to think about handing in to different people, and just the whole timing, it's quite an executive functioning project to be in high school. So
I imagine that there's also quite a bit of dealing with self-esteem issues as far as the kids go in that circumstance. Or, I know as a kid with ADD myself, the only thing that saved me was actually to have a fairly stable and solid home life. I know a lot of these kids don't have that, but one of the things that I saw in myself was development of, I can't do it, I can't do it. I'm sure in your school you deal with that type of issue as well and make it a more encouraging environment.
Right, I think the motivation is difficult because if you don't see success, you don't stay motivated.
Right.
And so I always tell our teachers that you really have to supply 90% of the motivation initially. Hopefully after our child's been with us for a while, they feel a little bit better. Mm-hmm. But I think it's very difficult for them not to feel poorly about themselves because they just aren't making it. And if you talk to them, they will always say in the beginning of the year, well, I'm going to get straight A's this year. It's going to be different this year. And you recognize that that's what they wish for, but they don't really have the plan for it. Not that they couldn't do it. And I think the other thing is that people keep saying, you're so bright, I don't understand why you can't do it. And that sort of hurts after a while because it's like, okay, come up with a solution for me.
It's frustrating because what ends up happening is you're so smart, and if only you applied yourself, it becomes almost a moral condemnation of the kid that they don't have the character or whatever, and it's not addressing the real issues that they've got. Right. So what are some of the big differences between what goes on in your school and what goes on, say, in a typical public school?
Well, I think class size is the first thing that comes up, and especially when you're talking about ADHD kids, you're trying to find an experience where people can have more direct speaking contact with them to help them focus, where they're working in smaller groups. Private schools have that advantage of having a smaller class, but I think if you went in and sort of thought about how you could break up your class and how valuable it is for these kids to work in smaller groups. Now, sometimes you have to have somebody there who's really good at saying, hey, John, are you staying with us? But I think at least that would give them a feeling of participating, and they need to be, their systems need to be active. So making them absolutely sit still and be quiet is the worst
It's
kind
cruel.
of, it's cruel, but it's also, they're not open to learning.
Yeah.
And they're actually open to more learning by pacing in the back of the class.
I can picture that. You have kids pacing around in the classroom?
Well, yes, if that's what they need to do.
Wow.
We're putting in our math class, we're putting bicycle pedals under the desks so that very quietly the kid can be moving, and there's a lot of good research about if we can see their movement as a more positive factor and a necessary factor. It might be that their brain needs to be active on a couple different channels in order to learn. So we're looking at all that kind of things, and I think there are things that can translate. I think the advent of personal technology is just a huge boon because they can find which handheld device works for them, and they're becoming more affordable to them. So if we really train them on that. So I think there's lots of things that we can take to the kids, and it's really teaching them to know themselves, and a lot of schematas. We do a lot of outlines. You know, here are the steps that you have to go through. Rubrics are really helpful for kids. You know, okay, there's step 1, 2, 3. They don't think about that ahead of time, but if the teacher will do some of that for them, and you have to take the kids where they are, not where you wish they were.
Right, and teachers so much of the time feel like, you know, this kid must be a deadbeat because they're not trying hard enough or whatever, when in fact these kids just, I mean, again, I remember just kind of being mystified why I couldn't do what other kids could be doing. So, so here we are in Washington, D.C., and you know, this sounds like nirvana, you know, a school that I would have just done much better in. So here we are in Washington, D.C. How can we spread the love out to other schools? How can we spread the love out to the typical school? How do we get change to happen for all the kids and not just for the few kids that are lucky enough to go to your school?
Well, I think one thing is really educating the teachers. I think teacher education has to be much more neuro-based, brain-based. I think we need to get people that are really interested in that in our field. I think that we need to get, you know, here's a great example. This is something any public school could do if they would allow them to do it. We had a parent who always brought in the kids' homework in a yellow folder, left it with the receptionist, and she put it in the teachers' mailboxes. Now, this kid was a 12th grader, and we were still doing it. And people said, well, I'll never be able to go to college. He graduated with honors from college. That's where he was at that point. So there are little small ways that we can spread this nirvana. And I think the other thing that we found is through the arts, a lot of our kids have been successful. And this is not just the talented kids, but that it's an alternative way of thinking that allows them to become a critical thinker, that allows them to become a sequential thinker. It's much more hands-on. It sort of goes around some of the linguistic difficulties. ADD kids do have some linguistic unique patterns as well. And
people have said that about my writing.
that it is. And so through the art, even going, even if they go through an art college or an art major, so 50% of their college degree is in arts and is in projects. And so then they have enough attention left for the other 50% to be in the wordsmithing. So we have to really plan out their programming. Those are all things that can be done for any kid.
Yeah. I'm going to close up with, you said something at the end that I really latched onto. It was the idea of this paradox between saying, yes, this we're going to raise awareness, but let's not pathologize these people. And what I tell parents when I see them is, I think ADD is just kind of who I am. I don't, people say, well, it's just their personality. I say, exactly. It is their personality, and what we're trying to do is stick them into a, square peg in a round hole. But do you see it that way as well, that these are just, it's not, is it a disease, or is it just kind of...
Well, I see it as neurodiversity. I see it as it's a very difference in brain structure. Mm-hmm. And it has impact on different tasks, and some tasks it impacts more, and there's a continuum. Some people are a little ADD, some people are very ADD. Right. And I think that people really have to understand that this is a sliver of who they are. Right. This isn't everything. There are a lot of other genes in there, and there is truth to the fact that as they look at ADD people, they do tend to be higher on the intellectual scale, and they're people that we don't want to lose. Right. They have so much potential to contribute, and if we put them down through the educational system so that they don't want to go on, we're losing a lot of talent here, and these really are the innovators that we're searching so hard to find. Yeah,
and the other thing is discouraging them by simply putting this label of this disease on them and say, oh, take this smart pill and you'll get better. I think we need to nurture that environment more. Well, thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome.
This is a very good interview.
Pleasure.
And that's all from Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Thank you very much.